Welcome back, pop culture detectives. We know BTS as untouchable global icons, but what happens when the stadium lights go out? How did the biggest superstars on the planet actually treat the people who raised them? Do unimaginable wealth and worldwide fame destroy their humble roots, or is there a hidden emotional reality behind closed doors that they never want you to see? Prepare to be completely blown away as we dive deep into the untold stories, hidden tears, and unbelievable sacrifices. Get ready, because this is the shocking truth about how BTS treat their families. Number 7. RM's The Crushed Microphone, A Mother's Tears, and the Vow That Shook the World. Let us rewind the tape and travel back to the quiet, highly competitive suburban streets of Ilsan, South Korea, where a young, exceptionally brilliant boy named Kim Namjoon was hiding a massive, universe-altering secret in his bedroom. Imagine being in the top 1.3% of the entire nation for your mock university entrance exams, possessing a staggering IQ of 148, and having parents who fully expected you to become a high-powered executive, a respected lawyer, or a top-tier scholar. But behind closed doors, beneath the heavy textbooks and towering expectations, Namjoon was secretly writing rap lyrics on hidden scraps of paper, dreaming of a stage far away from the rigid corporate world his parents had envisioned for him. Can you feel the suffocating tension in that household? The devastating clash between a traditional Korean family's practical dreams and a teenager's burning, unpredictable passion? The heartbreaking reality hit its absolute peak when his mother, discovering his hidden world, actually destroyed his computer keyboard and microphone. Let that sink in for a moment. The very tools that would eventually help him conquer the globe were smashed into pieces by the person who loved him the most, driven by the sheer terror that her son was throwing away a guaranteed brilliant future for a pipe dream in the ruthless, unforgiving music industry. It was a household at war, filled with silent tears, slammed doors, and a heavy, suffocating atmosphere of disappointment. But what did Namjoon do? Did he scream? Did he run away? No. In a moment of absolute bone-chilling clarity and maturity that defied his young age, he looked his mother in the eye and asked a question that would forever change the trajectory of their lives. "Mom, do you want a son who is the first-place student but fundamentally miserable, or do you want a son who is the absolute best rapper in the world and truly happy?" That poignant, desperate plea was the turning point, the emotional gamble of a lifetime. Fast forward to today, and the boy whose microphone was crushed is now the commanding leader of the biggest musical phenomenon on planet Earth, speaking eloquently in flawless English at the United Nations General Assembly, meeting with global presidents, and generating billions of dollars for the South Korean economy. But here is the shocking, profoundly emotional truth about how RM treats his family now that he has unimaginable wealth and absolute power. Does he hold a grudge for their lack of early support? Absolutely not. Instead, he has crowned them with unparalleled luxury, respect, and time. He took the immense, crushing pressure of being a global superstar and channeled it into becoming the ultimate provider. We are talking about staggering, jaw-dropping financial gratitude. RM famously purchased an ultra-luxurious multi-million-dollar apartment in the exclusive Hanam the Hill complex, one of the most expensive and prestigious real estate properties in all of South Korea, in pure cash, solely for his parents. He handed them a life of absolute security, erasing every single trace of the anxiety they once felt about his future. But the wealth is just the surface layer of this unbelievable story. The real secret to RM's sanity, the anchor that prevents him from losing his mind in the chaotic, blinding whirlwind of global fame, is the fiercely protected, quiet time he spends with his family. While other celebrities are swallowed whole by the toxic, flashy Hollywood lifestyle, fighting scandals and burning out, RM deliberately completely unplugs from the matrix of fame to be just Namjoon, the clumsy son. Have you ever wondered what happens when the cameras stop rolling? The genius leader who flawlessly choreographs stadium speeches turns back into the infamous god of destruction at home, breaking plates in her mother's kitchen and relying on her to fix the very messes a billionaire shouldn't be making. It is a beautiful, deeply touching psychological juxtaposition. He orchestrates the most complex musical empire in the world, yet he grounds himself by desperately needing his parents for the simplest, most human things. He regularly carves out completely secret, paparazzi-free days hidden behind bucket hats and masks to take his father on quiet, reflective tours through modern art museums across Europe and Korea. They stand in profound silence in front of canvas paintings, bonding over art, history, and life, completely detached from the screaming crowds of millions. It is in these dusty, silent galleries that RM finds his absolute peace, guided by the very father who once demanded he study instead of sing. How mind-blowing is it that the boy who fought his family to chase the stars now uses those very stars to illuminate his family's path? He didn't just give them money, he gave them a cultural renaissance, elevating their lifestyle to a pinnacle of artistic and intellectual wealth. Try to imagine the tidal wave of emotions his mother must have felt watching him advocate for youth self-love on the global stage, realizing that his stubborn rebellion was actually his divine destiny. Every royalty check, every sold-out stadium, every broken record, it all flows back to the foundation of that tense household in Ilsan. RM's story isn't just about achieving fame, it is the ultimate tear-jerking narrative of filial piety in the modern era, a testament to how true greatness never forgets where it came from. Does this change the way you view the untouchable leader of BTS? It absolutely should, because every single brilliant lyric he pens is steeped in the blood, sweat, and tears of a family that survived the brutal war of expectations to emerge victorious as royalty in the modern world, proving that sometimes the greatest act of love is proving your parents wrong so beautifully that they can do nothing but weep with immense, unbreakable pride. Number 6. Suga, the starving rapper, a shattered shoulder, and the silent bow that broke the internet. Let us plunge directly into the gritty, unforgiving, and incredibly tough underground streets of Daegu, South Korea, where the story of Min Yoongi completely shattered every single illusion of a glamorous idol fairy tale. Prepare yourself, because this is not a story of overnight success. It is a brutal, bone-crushing tale of sheer survival, unbelievable defiance, and a family dynamic so emotionally complex it will leave you absolutely speechless. Imagine being a teenager with a terrifyingly brilliant gift for producing music, but you are trapped in a cycle of suffocating poverty where a single bowl of cheap noodles feels like a luxury. Yoongi's parents were not villains, but they were terrified, desperate working-class people who had seen the harsh reality of the world. They looked at their son's notebooks, completely filled to the brim with frantic, genius rap lyrics, and saw nothing but a one-way ticket to a life of starvation. They were so utterly paralyzed by the fear of him failing in the ruthless million-to-one music industry that they did the unthinkable. They gathered up his precious lyrics, his life's work, and threw them away. Can you even begin to fathom the psychological torture of that moment? The agonizing heartbreak of having your own flesh and blood fundamentally reject the only thing that gives your soul purpose? It was a desperate act of tough love, born from pure survival instinct, but it drove a massive, icy wedge between Yoongi and his parents. Feeling completely alienated and misunderstood, the boy who would become the ferocious rapper known as August D made a soul-shattering decision. He packed his bags, left Daegu, and journeyed to the massive, terrifying metropolis of Seoul with absolutely nothing but a fiery, relentless chip on his shoulder. We're talking about a kid who had to constantly make the agonizing daily choice between taking the bus home or eating a cheap bowl of jjajangmyeon. If he ate, he walked for hours in the freezing rain. If he rode the bus, he went to sleep with a screaming, empty stomach. But the most horrifying chapter of this hidden history was the motorcycle accident. To pay for his tuition and living expenses, Yoongi secretly took a dangerous job as a delivery boy. One rainy, miserable night, a car slammed into him at an intersection, completely shattering his shoulder. Lying there on the wet asphalt, in excruciating, blinding pain, what do you think was his first thought? Was it to call his parents for comfort? No. He was so terrified that his family would force him to come back home, and so incredibly scared that his agency would fire him, that he literally hid the severe injury, lying through his teeth and saying he merely fell down the stairs. He endured the agonizing pain in absolute silence, performing complex choreographies with a broken body just to keep his dream alive. How does a human being carry that level of trauma, completely isolated from his family's warmth? But here is where the story flips into one of the most emotionally devastating climaxes in music history. Fast forward to the year 2016. BTS has finally broken through the blood-stained barriers of the industry. They are performing their massive historic epilogue concert at the Olympic Gymnastics Arena, a venue Yoongi had always told himself he had to reach before he could consider himself truly successful. The stadium is roaring. Thousands of army bombs are illuminating the darkness like a galaxy of stars. And suddenly, Yoongi's razor-sharp eyes scan the VIP section. There, sitting in the crowd, are his parents and his older brother. The same parents who told him he would fail, the same parents who threw away his lyrics. In a fraction of a second, the tough, unbreakable, stoic hip-hop persona of Suga completely and utterly disintegrated. Right there, in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans and millions watching worldwide, Min Yoongi collapsed to his knees, dropping his face entirely to the stage floor in a deep, full-body traditional Korean bow and began to sob uncontrollably. His shoulders shook violently as years of pent-up trauma, resentment, desperation, and desperate craving for his parents' validation poured out of him in a tidal wave of tears. It was a raw, unfiltered psychological release that completely broke the internet. But what happens after the tears dry? How does the man who had to fight his own family for his survival treat them now that he is a global multi-millionaire? The reality is nothing short of spectacular. Yoongi did not harbor a single ounce of toxic revenge. Instead, he unleashed a torrential downpour of financial and emotional gratitude. He completely wiped out every single debt his family ever owed, completely erasing their lifelong financial struggles overnight. He bought his parents a highly successful restaurant in Daegu, personally designing it and hanging his own BTS plaques inside to ensure the business would thrive endlessly, turning them into proud, stress-free business owners. Later, he moved them to a luxurious, highly secure estate in Seoul so they could be closer to him, completely shielding them from the prying eyes of the public. But the most heartwarming, deeply moving twist in this familial saga involves his older brother, Min Gumjae. When Yoongi was starving, when his parents opposed him, his older brother was the single, solitary family member who secretly believed in him, sneaking him money and encouraging him to audition for big hit entertainment. Yoongi never ever forgot that lifeline. When his brother got married, Yoongi didn't just pay for the lavish wedding, he stood up as the guest of honor, delivering an incredibly emotional, tear-jerking speech that left the entire venue weeping, publicly thanking his brother for being the sole reason he didn't give up on his life. Behind the intimidating, fierce glare of Suga lies a man who secretly writes sweet, emotional letters to his mother, constantly worrying about her health, and using his unimaginable wealth not for flashy cars, but to build an impenetrable fortress of comfort for the people who once broke his heart. It is the ultimate story of forgiveness, a breathtaking narrative of a boy who took the jagged, broken pieces of a fractured family and glued them together with gold. Does it make you look at his aggressive rap verses differently? To know that the fire in his voice wasn't just anger, but a desperate, roaring plea to finally be seen and accepted by his own blood? Yoongi proved that the sweetest revenge isn't cutting people out. It is succeeding so astronomically that you can return to the very people who doubted you and hand them the world on a silver platter. Number 5. J-Hope, the Forbidden Dancer, a mother's secret sacrifice, and the million-dollar vow that rewrote destiny. Let us shift the spotlight to the vibrant, historically rich city of Gwangju, the undisputed breeding ground of South Korea's most legendary street dancers, where a young, endlessly energetic boy named Young Hosok was fighting a silent, agonizing war inside his own home. Prepare to have your heart completely ripped open, because the story behind the ever-smiling, sunshine-radiating main dancer of BTS is actually rooted in an incredibly painful, high-stakes family drama that almost tore them apart. Imagine the suffocating, intense pressure of growing up in a household where your father is a highly respected, strict high school literature teacher. In traditional South Korean society, an educator's home is universally expected to be a rigid sanctuary of absolute academic discipline, quiet study, and prestigious university aspirations. Now, imagine being the son of that strict teacher, but instead of holding a pencil, your body is completely consumed by the loud, rebellious, and highly stigmatized world of underground street hip-hop. The clash was catastrophic and emotionally devastating. His father vehemently, absolutely despised the idea of Hosok dancing. To a traditional scholar, street dancing was not a career, it was a distraction, a delinquent path that would lead straight to failure, poverty, and public embarrassment. Can you visualize the heavy, unbearable tension at the dinner table? The disappointed glares, the loud arguments echoing through the thin walls, the crushing weight of a father's disapproval pressing down on a teenager whose only true sin was having explosive music running through his veins? But right in the middle of this devastating father-son battlefield stood the ultimate hero of our story, Hosok's mother. Seeing the raw, undeniable genius in her son's movements and witnessing the sheer, heartbreaking despair in his eyes when his father forbade him from practicing, she made a silent, monumental decision that would literally change the course of pop music history. Without the father knowing the full, grueling extent of her sacrifice, this incredible woman secretly took on strenuous, exhausting extra work, even traveling away from her hometown just to quietly fund Hosok's expensive tuition at the famous Joy Dance Academy. Let that devastating reality sink in for a moment. While Hosok was sweating in the dance studio, perfectly executing pops and locks, his mother was completely exhausting herself, pushing her physical limits, and sacrificing her own comfort purely so her son could chase a forbidden dream. Do you have any idea what kind of psychological toll that takes on a young, highly empathetic boy? Hoseok knew exactly what she was doing. He saw her tired eyes. He knew she was draining her own life force to fuel his, and it planted a massive, incredibly heavy seed of guilt and an unstoppable, burning desperation to succeed inside his soul. He swore to himself with every ounce of his being that he would not let her sweat be in vain. This intense, agonizing motivation is precisely what forged J-Hope into the terrifyingly strict, fiercely disciplined dance leader of BTS that we know today. He couldn't afford to fail, because failing meant his mother's grueling sacrifices were for nothing. When he moved to Seoul at just 15 years old, living in a cramped, freezing, cockroach-infested dormitory, it was the thought of his mother's calloused hands that kept him from completely shattering. There was even a terrifying moment right before BTS debuted, when the pressure became so overwhelmingly toxic that Hoseok actually left the group, packing his bags in sheer despair. It took RM's desperate intervention and his own agonizing reflection on his family's sacrifices to pull him back from the brink. Fast forward to the monumental release of BTS's iconic Wings album. While other artists were writing generic love songs, what did J-Hope do? He penned a jaw-dropping, incredibly emotional solo track simply titled Mama. He immortalized her sacrifice on a global scale, aggressively rapping about her endless support, the hidden tears, and the unbelievable strength she showed when no one else believed in him. He even embedded the actual audio of his mother's voice directly into the track. Imagine being that mother, sitting in the VIP section of the colossal sold-out Go-Check Sky Dome, surrounded by tens of thousands of screaming fans, and suddenly hearing your own son broadcast his eternal gratitude to you in front of the entire planet. The emotional weight of that moment is staggering. It is the ultimate, universally understood language of pure filial love. But J-Hope didn't just stop at a song. How does the sunshine of BTS treat his family now that he sits on an empire of unimaginable, jaw-dropping wealth? He went on a relentless mission to completely transform their reality, turning his childhood guilt into golden, unbreakable security. We are talking about top-tier, mind-blowing real estate flexes. J-Hope famously purchased multiple ultra-luxury units in the highly exclusive Seoul Forest Tramage complex, one of the most ridiculously expensive and secure buildings in all of Asia. He literally bought a palace in the sky, completely retiring his mother from her days of grueling labor and wrapping his parents in a life of absolute royalty, panoramic river views, and total peace of mind. But what about the strict, disapproving father, the man who once tried to crush the dream? This is where the story gets incredibly touching. Instead of holding a toxic, petty grudge against his father, Hoseok understood that the strictness came from a place of genuine, albeit misguided, parental fear. Today, that very same literature teacher is known to be bursting with an immense, uncontainable pride, happily boasting about his world-conquering son, completely won over by Hoseok's undeniable success and pure, fiercely respectful heart. And we absolutely cannot forget his fiercely beloved older sister, Jung Ji-woo, a highly successful fashion CEO and influencer. J-Hope and his sister share an unbreakable, incredibly tight bond that defies the usual celebrity isolation. They have traveled the world together, and he quietly acts as the ultimate billion-dollar walking billboard for her brand. When Ji-woo got married in a lavish, highly secure ceremony, J-Hope stood by her side, not as a global icon, but as the fiercely protective little brother who brought his BTS bandmates to celebrate her massive milestone. He treats his family not as burdens of his past, but as the very foundation of his present sanity. In an industry notoriously filled with massive egos, bitter lawsuits, and fractured families, J-Hope uses his blinding global superstar status as an impenetrable protective shield for the people he loves. He took the agonizing, sweaty, tear-filled sacrifices of a struggling mother and meticulously spun them into a golden, untouchable empire, proving to the entire world that when a child dances with the heavy, beautiful weight of his family's love on his shoulders, there is absolutely no stage on earth big enough to contain his success. Does this incredible, tear-jerking reality change the way you see his bright, energetic smile on stage, knowing that behind every perfectly executed, explosive dance move is a deeply rooted, fiercely loyal son who literally danced his way out of crushing pressure just to buy his family the world they so rightfully deserved? Number 4. V. The Forgotten Farm Boy. A grandmother's tragic departure and the golden watch that kept him alive. Let us journey far, far away from the blinding neon lights, the towering skyscrapers, and the suffocating rush of Seoul, diving deep into the quiet, rural, incredibly isolated farming village of Gaechong, where a young, starry-eyed boy named Kim Tae-young truly believed his ultimate destiny was simply to pull weeds, harvest crops, and become a strawberry farmer. Prepared to have your soul completely shattered because the story of the man universally crowned as the most handsome face in the entire world is actually rooted in a profoundly emotional, heart-wrenching family dynamic that will make you weep uncontrollably. Imagine being a child whose parents are working so incredibly hard, struggling so desperately to make ends meet in a harsh, unforgiving economy that they have to make the agonizing, deeply painful decision to send you away to be raised by your grandmother. For 14 long, crucial, formative years, Tae-young did not wake up to his parents. He woke up to the warm, calloused, loving hands of his grandmother. She wasn't just a guardian to him, she was his absolute universe, his mother, his father, his closest confidant, and his biggest, most passionate cheerleader. They shared a bond so incredibly pure and intensely tight that it defies any ordinary superficial explanation. While other kids were playing fancy video games in the fast-paced city, little Tae-young was roaming the dusty dirt paths in oversized clothes, drinking cheap vending machine milk, and holding his grandmother's hand, dreaming of a simple, quiet, peaceful life. But destiny had a completely different, wildly unpredictable plan. When he miraculously passed the big hit entertainment audition, an audition he only attended just to casually support a friend, he had to pack his bags, leave the only safe world he ever knew, and face the terrifying, ultra-competitive jungle of Seoul. This is where his father steps into the narrative, providing one of the most incredibly touching, tear-jerking moments in all of BTS history. Tae-young's father knew perfectly well that Seoul was a ruthless, cutthroat place, completely filled with rich, trendy city kids who had instantly looked down on a naive, wide-eyed farm boy. He was terrified that his beloved son would be ruthlessly bullied, outcasted, and completely stripped of his confidence. So, despite their incredibly tight financial struggles back home on the farm, his father scrounged together a significant amount of money and bought Tae-young a highly expensive, top-quality Swiss watch. It was a massive, crippling financial sacrifice for a struggling working-class family, but the psychological message behind the gift was crystal clear. Wear this watch, stand tall, look them straight in the eye, and do not let anyone ever make you feel inferior. Tae-young clung to that beautiful watch like a literal life preserver in a stormy ocean. He wore it everywhere, proudly showing it off to the other trainees, fueled by the agonizing, beautiful knowledge that his father had essentially given him his life savings just to protect his pride. Can you even begin to comprehend the immense, crushing psychological weight of carrying your father's protective, desperate love wrapped around your wrist while you navigate the darkest, most exhausting, bone-breaking trainee days? But the true, devastating climax of Taehyung's story happened right at the exact moment BTS was violently skyrocketing into unprecedented global superstardom. It was the fall of 2016, the monumental, history-making blood, sweat, and tears era, when the entire world was finally falling at their feet. BTS was winning first place on every single music show, shattering international records, and flying across the globe on endless tours. But behind the sharp, sexy stage outfits and the flawless, charismatic expressions, Taehyung was silently, agonizingly dying inside. Why? Because his fiercely beloved grandmother, the woman who raised him for 14 years, the very beating center of his heart, was incredibly, dangerously sick. And the most cruel, heartbreaking part of the idol industry is that the show absolutely, undeniably must go on. While he was thousands of miles away in the Philippines, smiling brightly for screaming fans, interacting playfully on camera, and performing high-energy choreographies, he received the devastating, world-ending phone call that his grandmother had passed away. Let that horrifying reality sink deep into your bones. Imagine your absolute favorite person in the entire world dying, and you are contractually obligated to smile, dance, and pretend everything is absolutely perfect in front of millions of people. He couldn't go to her bedside. He couldn't hold her hand one last time. He had to bury his absolute blinding agony deep down in his stomach and perform. The emotional dam finally tragically broke during BTS's third muster fan meeting at the colossal Gocheck Sky Dome. Standing in front of tens of thousands of deeply confused, worried fans who had noticed he seemed inexplicably sad for weeks, Taehyung completely and utterly broke down. Tears streamed down his flawlessly sculptured face as he gripped the microphone with shaking hands and confessed the agonizing secret he had been hiding. He sobbed as he told the world that she had died, and the absolute most heartbreaking thing he said was, "I wanted to mention her name on television when we won first place, to tell her I love her, but the timing didn't work out. I was too late." It was a moment of raw, catastrophic vulnerability that completely shattered the glossy, manufactured illusion of the K-pop industry, proving the horrifying human cost of global fame. But how does this agonizing, soul-crushing tragedy shape the way the man known as V treats his family today? It turned him into the most fiercely protective, incredibly generous, and deeply devoted son and brother on the planet. He did not let the grief turn him bitter or cold. He used it to fiercely guard the family he still has left. Taehyung practically worships his father. In a superficial world where celebrities idolize historical figures or legendary rock stars, Taehyung confidently looks into the camera and repeatedly states, "My role model is my dad. I just want to grow up to be exactly like him." He treats his parents to absolute mind-blowing luxury, taking them on highly secure, totally private vacations across the world, completely shielding them from the aggressive paparazzi. He uses his jaw-dropping wealth to buy them luxury cars, massive properties, and a life entirely free of the financial panic they once knew. He is famously incredibly protective of his younger sister and brother, deliberately hiding their identities from the savage, unforgiving public eye to ensure they can live normal, peaceful lives without the suffocating burden of being V's siblings. The internationally adored Gucci boy who regularly breaks the internet with a single glance, who hobnobs with Hollywood elites and global fashion CEOs, completely strips away his superstar ego the second he is around his parents. He is just a soft-spoken, incredibly affectionate boy who still desperately craves his father's approval and deeply honors the quiet, humble farm roots his grandmother planted in him. He took the immense, agonizing grief of losing his childhood guardian and meticulously transformed it into a golden, unbreakable shield for his family, ensuring that the brutal sacrifices of that struggling farmer's household in Gaichang were rewarded with absolute, undeniable royalty. Does this completely change the way you look at his soulful, deep voice on stage, knowing that behind the intense, captivating stare of a global icon is simply a grieving boy who wears his father's love like impenetrable armor and sings every single note to the heavens, desperately hoping his grandmother is looking down and smiling brightly at the magnificent harvest he finally brought home? Number 3. The Bleeding Heels, a father's secret cafe, and the desperate vow that defied the chopping block. Let us travel directly to the breathtaking, windswept coastal city of Busan, where a beautifully graceful, top-tier contemporary dance student named Park Jimin was harboring a terrifying, impossibly risky dream that could have easily completely destroyed his entire pristine future. Prepare yourself for a story of agonizing physical sacrifice, unspoken parental terror, and a breathtaking display of filial piety that will leave you absolutely weeping in awe. Imagine being the undeniable, absolute pride of your family, the rare, exceptionally gifted prodigy who literally entered the highly prestigious Busan High School of Arts as the valedictorian at the very top of the entire modern dance department. His parents, particularly his deeply hard-working, practical father, naturally and rightfully envisioned a highly stable, completely secure, and prestigious career for their brilliant son, perhaps hoping he would become a renowned classical performer, a highly respected educator, or a top-tier government official. But Jimin threw a massive, explosive curveball that sent absolute shockwaves through his quiet household. He wanted to completely abandon his guaranteed classical certainty, leave his elite schooling behind, and dive headfirst into the brutal, hyper-manufactured, and fiercely unpredictable meat grinder of the K-pop idol industry. Can you even begin to imagine the crushing, suffocating anxiety his father must have felt, knowing that thousands of kids travel to Seoul every single year only to return completely broken, heavily in debt, and stripped of their dignity? But instead of crushing his son's incredibly fragile dream, his father made an unimaginably brave, deeply emotional choice. He swallowed his own terrifying fears, opened his wallet, and paid for Jimin's expensive extracurricular dance academy, silently praying that his boy wouldn't be eaten alive by the ruthless entertainment machine. But the horrific, agonizing reality of big-hit entertainment in Seoul was 1,000 times worse than any nightmare. Jimin was the very last trainee to join the BTS lineup, thrust into a high-stakes, terrifyingly fast-paced environment with the absolute shortest training period of anyone in the group. The agency executives were notoriously brutal, and Jimin was literally placed on the chopping block, terrifyingly close to being kicked out of the final debut lineup a staggering, soul-crushing 8 different times. Can you even begin to comprehend the excruciating, paralyzing psychological torture of being a teenager, calling your parents back in Busan, hearing the immense hopeful pride in their voices, while secretly, agonizingly knowing that the agency executives might pack you on a train back home the very next morning as a complete, undeniable failure? The guilt of potentially wasting his father's hard-earned money and breaking his family's heart was a suffocating, heavy boulder crushing Jimin's chest. So what did he do? He completely stopped sleeping. Literally. Driven by a desperate, blinding terror of letting his parents down, Jimin pushed his human body far past the absolute brink of destruction. He slept for only 2 agonizing hours a night on the freezing, hard, unforgiving wooden floor of the practice room, relentlessly drilling his high-pitched vocals and executing impossibly complex acrobatics until his throat tasted like metallic blood. His muscles screamed in agony, and his heels were completely covered in raw, bursting, painful blisters. When he finally broke down crying, utterly exhausted and terrified of being cut from the team, what did his father tell him over the phone? In a beautifully heartbreaking, fiercely loving truth that completely shattered Jimin's anxieties, his dad said, "If you fail, it is completely fine. Just come back home to us. You can always start over, and we will always love you." That profound, unconditional safety net did not make Jimin relax or quit. Instead, it ignited an explosive, uncontrollable nuclear fire in his soul to conquer the absolute universe so his loving family would never, ever have to worry about him again. Fast forward to the present day, where the boy who almost got kicked out 8 times is now the undisputed, globally worshipped it boy of the K-pop industry, a mesmerizing performer whose solo songs break Spotify records and who single-handedly crashes massive fashion brand websites just by wearing their clothes. How does a global god of performance treat the parents who held his hand through the darkest valley of his life? He did not just shower them with money, he meticulously crafted an absolute, unshakable legacy of security and pride. We are talking about staggering, mind-blowing financial power moves. Jimin notoriously purchased a breathtakingly expensive multi-million-dollar ultra-luxury apartment in the heavily guarded, immensely prestigious 9-1 Hanam complex in absolute, unadulterated, pure cash, ensuring his family could visit him in absolute royalty. But he never, ever forgot his roots. Back in his hometown of Busan, his father now proudly operates the wildly successful, gorgeous Magnet Cafe. But Jimin doesn't use his global superstar status to aggressively promote it or shamelessly milk his dedicated fans for extra cash. Instead, he quietly, elegantly leaves pieces of his history there, his iconic performance suits, his personal hats, turning the cafe into a beautiful, dignified, deeply emotional sanctuary where his father can proudly and joyfully interact with thousands of international fans who travel from across the globe just to respectfully bow and say thank you to the man who raised a living legend. But here is the ultimate jaw-dropping act of love that will completely shatter your heart and make you respect Jimin on a cellular level. He honors his father's deep, lifelong respect for education, not by buying flashy, useless sports cars or throwing wild celebrity parties, but by quietly, consistently donating hundreds of millions of won to underprivileged schools across South Korea. He secretly replaces rotting desks, buys brand new winter uniforms for low-income children, and fully funds educational scholarships. And the most tear-jerking part? He often makes these massive, life-changing charitable donations secretly in his father's name. Do you realize the magnitude of that gesture? He takes his unimaginable, hard-earned global wealth and directly channels it to make his father the literal celebrated superhero of their hometown. He uses his massive stadium tour paychecks to ensure that other struggling parents in Busan don't have to feel the same terrifying financial panic his own father once felt. Does this completely and utterly change the way you watch Jimin execute those breathtaking, gravity-defying dance moves on stage? Knowing that behind the delicate, angelic smile and the fierce, captivating charisma is a fiercely devoted, incredibly grateful son who literally bled through his shoes just to buy his family the entire world, and who continues to use his massive fame as an endless, beautiful love letter to the father who once told him it was perfectly okay to fail. Number 2. Jungkook, the weeping child, a stolen youth, and the billion-won gift that shocked the nation. Let us completely rewind the clock and dive straight into the heart-wrenching, incredibly tender story of a quiet, painfully shy 13-year-old boy named Jungkook, who had to make an unimaginably terrifying sacrifice that almost completely broke his fragile spirit. Prepare to have your emotions absolutely shattered, because the story of the invincible golden powerhouse of BTS actually starts with a terrified, weeping child who was violently ripped away from the warm, protective embrace of his parents before he even had the chance to truly grow up. Imagine being barely out of elementary school, a time when most kids are just worrying about video games and homework, and suddenly you were placed on a high-speed train leaving the beautiful coastal city of Busan, completely alone, heading straight into the massive, terrifying, and fiercely competitive concrete jungle of Seoul. Jungkook was so paralyzingly shy that he would literally wait until all the other older trainees in the cramped dormitory had fallen completely, heavily asleep, just so he could secretly sneak into the tiny, freezing bathroom to take a shower, silently sobbing into his hands because the agonizing, suffocating homesickness was tearing his little heart into a million pieces. Can you even begin to comprehend the devastating psychological trauma of going through puberty, facing the brutal, cutthroat pressure of the K-pop trainee system, and desperately needing your mother's comforting hug, but she is hundreds of miles away? His parents, despite their cool, incredibly laid-back nature, his mother famously approached his father first because she thought he was ridiculously handsome, and his father was a highly talented athlete who often dressed up as Santa Claus just to keep Jungkook's childhood magic alive, had to endure the absolute torture of watching their youngest, most precious baby boy grow up through the cold, heavily edited lens of a television screen. They sent him off to chase a one-in-a-million dream, silently swallowing their own agonizing fears and immense parental guilt, trusting a group of older teenage boys to essentially raise their son. The sheer emotional weight of that separation is absolutely staggering. Jungkook literally traded his entire youth, his normal high school memories, and his precious teenage years with his family, just to bleed and sweat in a basement studio. There is a famous, incredibly tear-jerking moment during his early debut days when a hidden camera prank completely overwhelmed him, and the second the tension broke, he burst into violent, uncontrollable sobs, revealing the massive, fragile mountain of stress he was carrying as a mere child, completely isolated from his parents' physical protection. But how did this agonizing, terrifying separation shape the man universally crowned as the Golden Maknae? It forged him into an incredibly grounded, fiercely loyal, and fiercely protective son who has made it his absolute life mission to repay his family for every single tear they shed in his absence. Fast forward to today, where Jungkook is a colossal, unprecedented global superstar, breaking Billboard records, dominating the Spotify global charts, and performing solo at the monumental FIFA World Cup opening ceremony in front of billions of people. Does this unimaginable, godlike level of fame make him forget the parents who had to let him go so early? Absolutely not. He unleashed a massive, jaw-dropping display of financial and emotional gratitude that completely shook the South Korean real estate market to its very core. We are talking about staggering, astronomical wealth being generously handed back to his bloodline. Jungkook notoriously purchased a breathtakingly luxurious, multi-million-dollar apartment in the ultra-exclusive Yongsan district, an area known as the Beverly Hills of Seoul, and literally gifted it directly to his fiercely beloved older brother Jonghyun, completely out of pure love and gratitude. Let that mind-blowing reality sink in. He didn't just buy a nice car or a fancy watch, he handed his sibling an impenetrable, multi-million-dollar fortress of absolute financial security, proving that his astronomical success belongs equally to the family that supported him from the shadows. And for his parents, the man who commands stadiums of 80,000 screaming fans instantly turns back to the sweet, wide-eyed Busan boy, completely showering them with absolute luxury, top-tier comfort, and immense, unwavering respect. But the most emotionally devastating, profoundly beautiful part of Jungkook's relationship with his family isn't just the jaw-dropping real estate or the massive bank transfers. It is the fact that he meticulously, deliberately preserved the pure, untainted innocence and deep respect they instilled in him before he left home. In an incredibly toxic, ruthless industry that notoriously corrupts young stars, turning them incredibly arrogant or entirely disconnected from reality, Jungkook remains terrifyingly humble, constantly bowing a full 90 degrees to staff members and always verbally praising his parents for raising him with a perfectly straight moral compass. He tattooed his birth flower, the tiger lily, boldly and permanently onto his skin, accompanied by the phrase, "Please love me," as an eternal, incredibly touching homage to his roots and the familial love that kept his soul completely intact when he was just a lonely, crying 13-year-old hiding in a dorm bathroom. He uses his jaw-dropping, world-conquering platform to fiercely protect his family's privacy, violently shielding them from the aggressive, toxic paparazzi, ensuring that while he belongs to the world, they remain entirely safe and untouched in their peaceful lives. He took the immense, agonizing sacrifice of his stolen youth and completely transformed it into a golden, unbreakable empire for the very parents who agonizingly let him go so he could fly. Does this breathtaking, deeply emotional reality completely alter the way you listen to his angelic, powerhouse vocals? Knowing that behind the fierce, heavily tattooed exterior and the untouchable global pop star swagger is just a fiercely loyal, deeply grateful son who never ever stopped wanting to make his parents immensely proud, proving to the entire universe that the ultimate measure of a man isn't how many records he shatters, but how beautifully and fiercely he protects the people who loved him long before the world even knew his name. Number 1. Jin, the silent mother, a shattered acting dream, and the multi-million-dollar apartment that silenced the haters. Let us conclude this incredibly emotional, tear-jerking journey with the absolute pinnacle of our list, traveling to the affluent, high-pressure neighborhoods of Gwacheon, where the man globally known as worldwide handsome Kim Sok-jin was hiding a deeply profoundly agonizing secret behind his flawless, aristocratic face. Prepare to have your heart completely melted into a puddle because the story of BTS's eldest young is a breathtaking, masterful narrative of silent parental sacrifice, reversed family dynamics, and a desperate, burning desire to give his mother the ultimate bragging rights that will leave you absolutely breathless. Imagine growing up as the youngest son in a highly successful, wealthy, and heavily educated family, where societal pressure to succeed is an invisible, suffocating weight pressing down on your chest every single day. His father was an imposing, highly successful corporate CEO, and in traditional upper-class South Korean society, the mothers of such families constantly gather around, aggressively drinking tea and shamelessly, fiercely bragging about their successful, high-achieving children. But there was a heartbreaking, agonizing truth that completely shattered young Seokjin's heart every time he witnessed these gatherings. His beautiful, loving mother, sitting quietly among her wealthy friends, would simply listen in absolute humiliating silence. She never spoke up. She never bragged. Why? Because her teenage son hadn't yet achieved anything monumental that she could loudly boast about in those highly competitive, toxic social circles. Can you even begin to fathom the immense, crushing psychological pain of a deeply empathetic, highly observant son hiding out of sight, watching his beloved mother silently swallow her pride and remain voiceless just because he hadn't yet found his path to greatness? That agonizing image of his silent mother became an unstoppable, raging inferno inside Seokjin's soul, a desperate, absolute vow to one day make her the proudest, loudest mother in the entire universe. He originally wanted to be a serious, highly respected dramatic actor, fiercely studying and successfully enrolling in the fiercely competitive Jungkook University's acting department against brutal odds. But when Big Hit Entertainment notoriously street-casted him simply for his jaw-dropping, otherworldly good looks as he was stepping off a bus, he was violently thrust into a world he knew absolutely nothing about. He couldn't sing, he couldn't dance, and he was suddenly surrounded by incredibly talented underground hip-hop prodigies who lived and breathed music long before they even met him. Do you realize the terrifying, soul-crushing humiliation of being the oldest member in a debut group, yet being completely and utterly the worst at the very skills required to survive in the industry? But Jin absolutely refused to quit, because quitting meant his mother would forever remain silent. He practiced until his body physically broke down, staying up until the agonizing hours of dawn, meticulously memorizing complex hip-hop choreographies that did not come naturally to his stiff body, and training his vocal cords until they literally bled, ultimately transforming himself into the legendary silver-voiced powerhouse who flawlessly delivers the most emotionally devastating high notes in the entire K-pop industry. He also took the immense nurturing love his family gave him and completely redirected it toward his younger bandmates, literally cooking meals for them, driving Jungkook to high school, and acting as their surrogate parent in Seoul so their own families wouldn't have to worry. But the ultimate mind-blowing climax of his story happens when the massive, world-conquering wealth finally flooded in. How did the worldwide handsome star treat the family that raised him once he achieved godlike superstar status? The answer is an absolute jaw-dropping flex of immense filial piety that will leave you completely astounded and deeply moved. In 2020, Jin notoriously and quietly transferred the full, absolute legal ownership of his ultra-luxurious, completely breathtaking multi-million-dollar apartment in the insanely exclusive Hanem the Hill complex, a legendary fortress of wealth where top-tier politicians and A-list celebrities reside, directly to his parents. He didn't just casually buy them a nice house, he literally handed over the deed to one of the most ridiculously expensive, fiercely guarded pieces of real estate in all of Asia, a staggering 4.2 billion won property, completely sacrificing his own massive slice of billionaire luxury just to say the ultimate thank you to the people who gave him life. He completely insulated them from any financial worry for the rest of eternity, wrapping them in an impenetrable shield of extreme luxury and perfect security. Furthermore, his relationship with his older brother, Kim Sok-jung, is universally hailed as the absolute gold standard of unbreakable sibling bonds in a toxic celebrity world. Jin fully backed his brother with massive financial support to open a highly successful, exquisite Japanese restaurant in Seoul, completely securing his brother's entrepreneurial dreams. And when his brother's wife became pregnant, proving that his super superstar ego had absolutely no place in his family dynamic, who was the first person to delightfully bestow a nickname on the unborn child? Uncle Jin, who joyfully and hilariously dubbed the baby Butter in honor of BTS's record-shattering Grammy-nominated hit song. He treats his family with such pure, unadulterated devotion, constantly inviting his parents to the most exclusive VIP sections of massive stadiums all over the world, ensuring they have the absolute best seats in the house to witness his godlike glory. Today, when his mother sits in those elite, upper-class social gatherings, she absolutely never, ever has to remain silent ever again. She is the mother of Kim Sok-jin, a literal cultural titan who generated billions of dollars for the South Korean economy, bravely served as a distinguished, highly respected frontline commander in the military without a single complaint, proudly carried the Olympic torch in Paris, and completely conquered the entire global music world, entirely silencing every single hater and rival mother with the sheer, undeniable magnitude of his golden existence. Does this profoundly touching, incredibly tear-jerking reality completely change the way you look at his famous flying kisses, his hilariously infectious windshield wiper laugh, and his playful dad jokes? Knowing that behind the comedic, lighthearted, incredibly handsome persona is an incredibly fierce, endlessly devoted youngest son who literally carried the crushing weight of his mother's silent pride on his broad shoulders, completely abandoning his original dreams and meticulously, flawlessly transforming himself into an untouchable global pop icon, just to see his family finally radiantly smile from the absolute top of the world.